In the summer of 1842, along the slow, humid bends of the Mississippi River, there stood a plantation known as Briar Glen. From a distance, it looked like prosperity itself. The manor house rose 3 stories high, built of pale brick that reflected the southern sun like polished ivory. Tall columns framed its veranda. Green shutters guarded wide windows. Oak trees draped in Spanish moss surrounded the estate like silent sentries. Travelers passing by saw wealth. What they did not see was what that wealth had cost. The owner of Briar Glen was a man named Edmund Hale. He was not born into fortune. His father had owned only a modest tract of land and a handful of enslaved laborers. But Edmund possessed something more dangerous than inheritance. He possessed ambition without restraint. By the time he reached his early 30s, Edmund had expanded the estate into one of the most profitable cotton operations in the region. Bales of white fiber left his docks weekly, bound for markets in New Orleans and beyond. His name appeared in trade ledgers. His reputation spread quickly among merchants. Neighbors described him as disciplined, calculating, and composed. Those who worked under him described something else. Life at Briar Glen operated by numbers. Every pound of cotton was recorded, every tool accounted for, every human body was measured in productivity. Among the enslaved families on the plantation was a man named Solomon Reed, his wife Clara, and their 12-year-old son Isaiah. Solomon was known for his quiet strength. Clara possessed a sharp mind and an even sharper awareness of danger. Isaiah had begun working in the fields that year, small hands learning the brutal rhythm of cotton harvesting. They lived in a wooden cabin set behind the fields, its walls thin, its roof patched repeatedly after storms. At night, wind slipped through cracks in the boards. During summer, heat clung to the air like wet cloth. Still, within those walls, they tried to preserve something human. Solomon told stories after dark, not loud enough to travel, but strong enough to endure. Clara hummed hymns she remembered from childhood. Isaiah listened, absorbing the fragile hope woven into their whispered moments. But Briar Glen was not built to protect hope. It was built to extract. In 1843, cotton prices surged unexpectedly. Demand from northern mills and British factories increased. For Edmund Hale, the news was not merely fortunate, it was transformative. He began pushing for higher yields. Field quotas were raised, rest breaks shortened, punishments became harsher, more public, more deliberate. Where discipline once hid behind structure, it now revealed cruelty. Overseers were instructed to record deficiencies. Missed targets resulted in withheld rations. Illness was treated as defiance. Injury was labeled laziness. Solomon noticed the change immediately. He had survived difficult years before. He had endured drought, flood, and exhaustion. But this felt different. This felt like escalation. One evening, after a long day in the fields, Isaiah stumbled while carrying his cotton sack. The load was too heavy for a boy his size. He fell forward into the rows, white fiber scattering across the soil. The overseer did not see a child. He saw loss. Isaiah was beaten in front of the other workers, not savagely, but deliberately, enough to send a message. Solomon watched. He did not move. To move would have meant death. That night, inside their cabin, Clara pressed cool cloth to her son's bruised back. Solomon sat in silence, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the dirt floor. They understood something had shifted. Briar Glen was tightening its grip. As profits rose, so did Edmund Hale's confidence. He expanded the acreage further. More land cleared, more labor demanded. New accounting books filled quickly. Visitors praised his efficiency, but whispers began circulating beyond the plantation boundaries. Runaway attempts had increased in the surrounding counties. Stories of secret gatherings, coded songs, and planned escapes traveled along riverbanks and through church pews. Edmund responded with surveillance. Night patrols intensified. Informants were quietly incentivized. Families were separated if suspicion arose. Fear became strategy. One autumn evening, Solomon confided in Clara that he had been approached discreetly by a man from a neighboring plantation. There was talk of a route north, of guides, of safe houses beyond the river. It was dangerous. It was uncertain. It was hope. Clara did not answer immediately. She understood the stakes. Failure meant violent retribution, not only for them, but for others. But staying meant slow destruction. Weeks passed in tension. Then, in early November, a decision was made. They would try. The night chosen was moonless. Wind moved through the trees, masking sound. Solomon had studied the patrol patterns carefully. There was a narrow gap near the southern boundary. Clara packed little: a blanket, dried corn, a small wooden carving Isaiah refused to leave behind. They stepped into the dark. For a moment, the plantation behind them seemed almost peaceful. Then dogs began barking. The alarm spread quickly. Lanterns ignited across the yard. Shouts echoed between cabins. They had been betrayed. Solomon ran, with Isaiah ahead of him, Clara close behind. The river was not far, but it was far enough. They did not reach it. Solomon was captured first. Clara fought when seized. Isaiah screamed until his voice broke. By dawn, they were returned to Briar Glen. Edmund Hale stood on the veranda as they were brought forward. His expression did not reveal rage, it revealed calculation. Punishment would not only correct, it would demonstrate. Solomon was publicly whipped. Clara was separated and assigned to interior labor under constant watch. Isaiah was relocated to a distant section of the fields, away from his parents. The family was fractured by design. Winter settled heavily that year. Production did not slow. Yet something had changed within the enslaved community. The attempted escape, though failed, had planted something powerful: the knowledge that resistance was possible. The following spring, disease swept through portions of the plantation. Overwork, malnutrition, and exposure had weakened many. Several laborers died quietly, their deaths recorded only as inventory loss. Edmund blamed inefficiency, but numbers began to falter. Cotton output declined slightly, not dramatically, but enough to concern investors. He responded with stricter enforcement. What he did not recognize was that morale, once broken completely, yields obedience, but morale partially broken yields resistance. Tools went missing. Wagons broke unexpectedly. Seeds were misplaced. Work slowed subtly. No single act was dramatic, but together they formed quiet rebellion. By 1845, cotton prices began to fluctuate unpredictably. Debt increased. Expansion loans demanded repayment. Briar Glen's shining facade began to strain. Visitors still saw wealth, but inside the ledgers, margins tightened. Solomon survived his punishment, though scars remained across his back. Clara endured isolation. Isaiah grew taller, harder, quieter. hope had not disappeared, it had hardened. In the years that followed, national tensions over slavery intensified. Political debates grew louder. Newspapers carried arguments that would soon fracture the nation. Edmund Hale believed his empire permanent. History believed otherwise. By the time the Civil War erupted nearly 2 decades later, Briar Glen's dominance had already weakened. Supply lines fractured, markets collapsed. The institution that had fueled Hale's fortune began unraveling. When Union forces moved through the region, emancipation followed in their wake. Solomon, Clara, and Isaiah stepped beyond the plantation boundaries legally for the first time. They did not celebrate loudly. Freedom, after such endurance, arrived quietly. Edmund Hale's wealth dissolved in post-war Reconstruction. The grand columns of Briar Glen remained standing, but maintenance declined. Paint peeled, roof tiles loosened. The estate that once symbolized power became a relic. Years later, travelers would pass the abandoned house and speak of its past in hushed tones. They would admire the architecture. They would speculate about former glory. But the true history of Briar Glen was not written in its columns. It was written in the endurance of those who survived it. The plantation had been built on extraction, of labor, of dignity, of family. What it could not permanently extract was memory. And in the quiet after the empire collapsed, memory remained. Not polished, not erased, but present. Like footprints that refuse to fade from riverbank soil.